Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds. We are back. This is going to be a fun one. Custom rod building. And we're talking about some high-end custom rod building with my boy Brandon here. We're going to talk about some of the biggest mistakes that a lot of inshore anglers, weekend warriors, because we're mostly going to focus on inshore fishing here, even though Brandon kind of does everything, originally a surf fisherman. But we're going to talk about the mistakes, talk about graphene. I took a couple notes down because we talked offline. 200 times stronger than steel and stretches, and dang, this is going to be a cool one, man. So let me give the quick backstory, and I'll introduce Brandon here because if you guys are listening to the podcast, we're also doing this on YouTube too. If you want to go see it, I can see Brandon's got a rod here right in front of him. We're going to show a couple things off. But we talked about doing this, and thank you all for the amazing feedback, all of you who do subscribe to the podcast and on the reviews. And we asked a lot of times, like usually every episode, what do you guys want? What do you want us to talk about? And we've heard a couple of times, hey, get someone to talk about custom rods. I think a lot of people are curious about it. Even me, I've never done one myself, but I'm always kind of curious, like how hard is it? What does it take? And one of our members had mentioned your name, and Tony Acevedo, one of our coaches, had fished with the member, and you might know his name. I don't remember the member's name off the top of my head. But Tony used it. He felt it. He's like, dude, this is one of the nicest rods I've ever felt in cast. Like, this is smooth. He talked to you. He's like, all right, this guy can get in front of a camera. He's going to be awesome. Talk to you offline. I was like, all right, I'm sold. Let's do it. So Brandon Elinich, did I nail it?
Yeah, good enough. Tell you the truth, you might be right. I might be wrong about my name. I don't know.
I didn't know what's your last name.
It's Elinich.
Elinich.
Like I said, you might be right. I don't know.
That's why I have to do every episode. Simons like diamonds. People say Simmons and Simundo. I've heard everything. So,
yep.
Yeah. All right. So, Brandon, you with Black Pelican Custom Rods. What's the story, dude? How did you get into this? Were you born a rod maker?
No, I wasn't actually. As a kid, I was always very into technical stuff, and thank God for my parents were very, very cool with me tearing stuff apart and trying to figure out how it works and just leaving it in piles in the garage. So, then I started getting into fishing when I was real young, and I just fell in love with it. And basically when I got to the salt into the surf fishing is when I really fell in love with it. And I did some tournament angling, and then I realized, there's another aspect to it other than just buying a rod off the shelf or doing something. You can do different things as far as changing the reel seats, the grips, the guides, all that stuff. So one day I just woke up and said, I want to build my own rod. So I enrolled in the University of YT, which is the University of YouTube, and basically started watching videos over and over and over and over again. And then I went on Google, just searched up rod building and building components, got my first kit, and built my first rod, and it came out like it was my first rod. It was, it was my first rod. So I was like, wow. I still have it. Oh, absolutely. I still have it sitting in the back, and it's but it looked like it was the first rod. And then that was probably about 8 years ago, and probably about last year, right around this time, actually, is when I said, okay, you know what? I want to do this. I want to go after this and really bring something to the table for people to use that can excel them in fishing.
What I found is there's not that much. I mean, I take that back. There's a lot of different videos on YouTube about how to, but there's not like any real thorough ones. And some of the ones that are at the top, they were from like 10 years ago. Right. And it's probably some of the ones that you were watching back then. They're so old school, and maybe a lot hasn't changed, but I know some of the components and this, graphene and stuff we're going to talk about has changed drastically. So how many rods were you cranking out in the beginning? Did you start with that one and then realize, hey, I can make this better? I assume it was a constant just trial and error.
Yeah, basically, it's almost like anything, when you start to learn and start to do something new, your first, third, fifth, sixth, seventh isn't going to be, perfect. It's going to take a while, a lot of practice, repetition. And, after a couple of years, that's where I got to now, is where, so it's it's just keep on keeping at it and learning. And what you got to do too is if you're looking at stuff online, there's so many different aspects, and you have points from the left, the right, the bottom, the top, and you have to kind of look at logically and put it together. You know what I mean? So you're not taking one person's point of view. You can kind of look at two and say, okay, this will work right, or because there's some bad info out there. I mean,
Yeah. Well, let's hit the first question then. Like, what are the advantages to doing a custom rod versus store bought? Right. I mean, I have to imagine the majority of people, either buy something online if they've already tested it and they know what they want, like I do, or you go into a store, whether it be a big box store or you go to your local tackle store, whatever it might be. What are the main benefits besides being able to get your name engraved and that kind of cool stuff?
Yeah.
Maps, but what are the main benefits?
Yeah, you have your basic stuff. You can do fancy wraps, and it makes it look like works of art. But what I strive to do is bring a performance aspect to it that is like nothing else you'll see. So, for example, every blanket is spined perfectly. The guys are aligned on the spine. So, during casting, when the blank compresses, it's got to release that energy. So if it's off a spine, which would be like every rod has a spine, so if you lock up the action and twist it, you can feel it lock into place. And that's the natural position the blank wants to be in. If it's off a spine, what happens is the compression during casting will want to release. And if it's off a spine, it naturally wants to twist back in that position. So you'll actually release energy to the side, which is torsion, left or right. And it can hinder casting. You can get less distance out of it. And on the flip side is if you're fighting a fish, once you're locked up in that fighting position, if it's off spine, the rod will want to twist back into that natural spot. So you actually feel it when you start getting into bigger fish and everything. You'll have what's known as like rod twist. You'll feel some. I don't know if you ever get hooked up and it's kind of off and it feels like it wants to pull to one side or the other. Comfort with grip sets. You just buy one off the shelf. Every grip is the same. Every grip is the same. Every grip is the same. There's guys that are 6'4". There's lady anglers. There's people that are different sizes, more comfortable for them. So typically when you have a rod butt section, when you're trying to fish, some guys like longer grips for casting. Some guys like shorter grips, and some anglers like it pretty much right at the elbow for fighting and all that. So you can change the grip position to comfort the angler. So there's no fatigue. You reduce fatigue if you're casting. I'm sure you're out there all day in the salt and you're throwing. And eventually, like, oh man, my shoulder, like it's starting to get beat up a little bit. And change up the grips. There's so many different grips now. Back in the day, it was just strictly pretty much cork. That was it. Now you have wind grips, you have gripless sets, you have EVA, the foam. So you can really tailor a rod to somebody's specific casting and fish playing ability, and switching out the guides as far as titanium and assault, so there's no corrosion, lighter. It's basically just to pinpoint the angler so they can, put more fish on.
So one thing you mentioned was the spine, because all the custom stuff I get, that's really interesting. So do you see that a lot of the off the shelf rods, like in a big box store, they do have some issues with the spine? Is that?
I would imagine so. See, I've never built in a factory, so I couldn't tell you per se. But if you're pumping out rods like that, it takes a little bit of time. So I have seen a couple off a spine, off of the. I've been building so long now, I haven't even picked one off the shelf in years. But you can actually grab it and lock up the action and bend it, and you can feel where that spine's at, and the guides will line up on it. I would imagine that. Yeah, probably going through a factory and they're trying to pump them out. They'll probably miss a few here and there.
Yeah, cool. I got to know, what do you have right in front of you? For those of you watch on YouTube, you can see he's been teasing us here with this.
Yeah, this
really pretty rod.
This is one of the new Century models here. It's inshore. It's 7.5 feet to moderate action, so you get that bend right down into the midsection. It's the carbon is autoclave carbon. Is processed differently than any other carbon composite. It's integrated with graphene, which is
let's talk about this graphene, dude. What's going on with the graphene?
So, I believe it was 2012, a scientist figured out that if you strip down graphite by a monoatom layer and arrange the atoms in a honeycomb lattice, so it looks like a honeycomb almost, that it creates immense strength capabilities. So what it does is your typical carbon, you have the thin wall design, it can get kind of brittle. So it's prone to, if you high stick it, it can break. What the graphene does, integrated with the resin, is allows that carbon to stretch and without breaking. The graphene itself, after testing, it was 200 times stronger than steel per weight. It's harder than a diamond. It's stretchable. It's cuttable. So it's really taking properties of basically physics and just amplifying what you can do with it.
And so, tell me where does that come into play with the rod? Is it a layer? Is it mixed? Like, is it mixed in the carbon? How does that?
Yeah, basically, the way that Century processes the blanks is it's mixed in with the resin or the glue that matches up the carbon. So it's rolled on a mandrel with everything, but then it's thrown through an autoclave, which is an autoclave is just a big cylinder basically, and the rod blanks are put in a vacuum bag, and then it's under tremendous amounts of heat and pressure, which is different from traditional carbon processing, which is thrown in a kiln or an oven. What the autoclave does, it compresses and gets all that resin out. Well, not all of it, but the majority of it. So you get the micro bubbles out, the air bubbles. It makes it basically a resin-lean composite, which makes it super dense. And then when you integrate the graphene with that, it makes the bond structural, because the graphene itself is carbon. So it makes it structural. The sensitivity goes through the roof. So, I make a joke about it sometimes, if you're out there fishing and a fish swims by and farts, you're going to feel it. So, I mean, but that, they make it super sensitive, and then the graphene allows it to stretch. And then we add the outer layer, which is either a Textream or 1K carbon weave, which is kind of like the armor of the carbon, because it's not impenetrable, but what it does, it protects the carbon matrix. So you don't, from nicks, dings, penetration, that's where the carbon can actually weaken.
And so what is this? What, for those of you watching on YouTube, what kind of wrap is this, or what is that? It looks pretty cool from what I can see.
This is the Textream. So it's actually like almost like a carbon tape. It was from a company, I believe, in Sweden. It's basically just an armor for the carbon. And then it actually makes the rod very fast tip recovery. When you cast it, it basically recovers back to zero very quick. It's really good for all casting, but when you're starting to get tighter baits, spoons, jig heads, a lot of tighter stuff, it really loads and handles pretty well.
Cool. So you got my attention with sensitivity. So for intro, let's just take like redfish, snook, and speckled trout and flounder. So you're making what looks like kind of like the perfect rod, right? An inshore spinning rod, super light, super sensitive, and crazy strong, which I assume is going to let you have a lighter rod, right? So that you can fight a bigger fish with less. Is that all correct? Is that
absolutely? With the integration of the autoclave and the graphene, you can actually get the walls a little bit thinner, take a little bit of weight out of it. One of my guys down in North Carolina there, Mikey, I don't know if you've seen that, what I sent you with the cobia and the redfish.
Yeah, I saw that picture. Yeah.
That's a 6.5 foot rod with a very small butt diameter. It's very light. I think it weighed out to 3.6 ounces after it was built. And he locked up a 37-inch cobia. Now, I mean, the fish did what it wanted to do for a while, but it held up and got him on the boat. So yeah, the sensitivity too is, when you're out there and you're flounder fishing and for specks and all that, you can feel so much more. You can feel the grass when you're coming through it. You can feel, anything, especially flounder. Sometimes, they'll suck that up real quick and you kind of won't even know. And then you miss the hook set because they'll realize and throw it back out. It's so sensitive, you can just feel everything, and it just basically increases your percentage of hooking a fish.
Love it. Let's talk about another question I hear all the time is the different actions, right? And it could get confusing because it seems like a lot of manufacturers have slightly different interpretations of fast action and moderate action, medium action. Can you kind of give us the breakdown, the dummy's guide to action on the rod?
Right. So you have your action. So basically moderates, moderate fast, fast, extra fast. It's all in the position of the rod blank where the rod starts to bend. Um, the fast actions, they're pretty sensitive and tight as far as casting. They're good for like I said, tighter baits, something that's more aerodynamic. The more moderates, you get a lot of tumble out of if you're using, chunky plugs or something like that. If you use a moderate action, what it does is it slows down that tip recovery after the cast, and it kind of reduces that tumble of the bait when it goes through the air. As far as hook setting, fast actions, you have a quicker hook set. The more moderates, it's more slower, so the fish can actually take the bait further. So it kind of depends on your style of fish and what you're baited up with.
What do you do more of? What are you making more of?
The fast.
Okay.
Now, the thing with these rods is they have a 3-tiered modulus or fiber count throughout the rod. So you have distinct butt, mid, and tip section. So what these rods do is they're fast, but when they're put under a lot of stress, it releases the energy down into the rod butt and almost turns them parabolic. So it almost turns it into a moderate action, per se. It's not a true moderate action, but instead of, I'm sure you've probably felt a rod before where you're on a decent fish and the stop of the action, it felt like it was up in the tip. It kind of just stayed there, and it kind of probably felt a little uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. What these rods do is they'll let that energy down into the butt section, so it almost feels like the fish is in your hand. And so that's where you get a lot of the power from, too.
Dang. All right, another one. Cork. I've also heard that cork is the most expensive thing about building the rod. Is that a rumor? Is that true? Let's talk a little bit about cork on these inshore spinning rods.
Cork can be pretty expensive, yes. Once you get up into the grades, like the higher grade cork, they can get pretty expensive. So, but there's a lot of stuff coming out now that I've only built probably 2 to 3 rods with cork in the past year. Everything's
what are you using?
I'm using more towards the gripless, which is kind of like, this is the gripless, like Alps makes a lot of these seats, Fuji makes one. Basically that's it. It's very ergonomic. So
try to explain it for those listening on iTunes and Spotify.
So basically the real seat is very comfortable in the hand. So when you're fighting a fish, it basically sets right in the palm of your hand, and there's no actually true grip to it. You can add, slight additions to it. Extending out from the top or the bottom is if you want to do cork or EVA, or even what I'm doing a lot now is wind grips. They're a big thing. I started using them a little bit ago, and they're amazing. There's a win. So basically, it's just a foam EVA core wrapped in a polymer, and they're very comfortable. They're light. They're tacky when they're wet. That's a big thing too, because I'm sure you felt when the cork gets wet or the EVA gets wet, you can get a little slick feeling to it. This is kind of grippy. So when it gets a little tacked up, the dry tacks get kind of sticky.
Wind grip. And what about split grips? It seems to be a trend of having a split grip. Mm-hmm. What's the deal?
Split grips. Oh, let me see if I can grab this. Split grips here, like this. They are, what you can do is you can reduce a lot of weight when you have extended grip. Like this is a 14.5 inch or 15 inch grip from the front of the reel seat. So all this material in the back section, you can reduce that. You can lighten up the rod. You could switch them. You could put a big foregrip or smaller foregrip, whatever you want. And they're pretty comfortable. I'm all my rods pretty much have split grips. I'll still build with a fully extended butt, a 14 inch or whatnot. But I'm really, really in love with these here. They're really comfortable, and it's just the performance you're looking for. When you're out there all day throwing over and over again.
Does it make it cheaper too, or is it more expensive to have the split?
It makes it a little bit cheaper, yeah. comparably, with like a wind grip setup is probably comparable to cork.
Okay.
Maybe like a little bit less expensive. But they're pretty comparable in price. I'd say as far as price goes, the most expensive thing besides the rod blank is the guides. That's where it can really go up there with some of the stuff from like titanium and torzite, the hard ring materials. That's where you can go up in price a lot.
All right, let's talk about that, because I want to get into some of the biggest mistakes people make when they get into this, and just all the materials, the equipment. But let's talk about the guides before we get into that, because that is a big question. How big of an impact, and how big do you want your guides? How far spaced? Another question that I've seen from people that are starting to get into this.
Right. Okay. Let's go in materials first. You have stainless guides, which is stainless steel. Typically, I build them in freshwater applications. You can use them in salt. You got to keep them really clean. So basically, when you're done, spray them down, because over time they will rust. And what seems to happen a lot with them is, over time, some little bit of salt water will get underneath of the foot of the guide on the blank itself and rust from the inside out, basically. And that's where you come into failures. Titanium is what you want in the salt. Anti-corrosive, it's very light. And as far as ring materials, there's a bunch of different ring materials that are harder than others, like silicon. SICK rings from Fuji. They're hard, and then you go step up to the torzites, which are the new thing now. They're very hard material, so they're very fracture resistant upon impact. That's what now with the materials, the braid it's not going to tear up rings anymore. It's more or less the impact resistance or the fracture resistance from just your everyday angling. What was your other thing about spacing, you said?
Yeah, spacing. So how far apart on the actual blank do you space these things?
Yeah, this is the fun part, because all the blanks are so much different. So even just changing the action of the one blank, your spacing is going to be different. The way I do it is basically, when the rod is loaded up in the action 90 degree, you want to see that line trace the curve of the blank to almost be parallel with the whole thing, and you don't want to see this almost like a hexagonal kinking to the line compared to the blank. What that does is it reduces pressure in certain portions of the blank. So if you have one of those tight angles in the midsection of the blank, it can create more stress in that part of the rod than is necessary. Then when you space it, as far as casting goes, you want that to what I'm using a lot of now is the high frame guides. They're smaller rings, they're lighter, and what it does is it traps that line down onto the blank and shoots it out. So there's less line slap. Typically, your older style rods, you had the cone of flight system, where gradually the ring size would drop all the way to the tip. And what happens is, especially with spinning rods, when a line comes up the spool, it rotates, and it kind of smacks the guide frame or the ring. And every time that happens down the rod, you're losing a little bit of energy. So if you can trap it quickly and have the runners shoot out almost a straight line, you're preserving as much energy as possible for the cast, and you get extremely long casts out of it.
So you're going smaller rings than normal?
Yeah. Like, for example, this is like a 20 millimeter guide on a high frame. What happens is the high frames raise the ring height up to match up with the spool of the reel, and you can use a smaller ring because of the height of the guide itself. So you're reducing weight, and you can trap the line down onto the blank faster. So typically you have a gathering guide, your front one, and then you have your reduction guides that come down. So like Fuji uses with their Kara system, it's a basically 4-point reduction. You can use a 3-point. So it'll drop 3 times, and then it takes running guides out through the tip, which usually hits about right around 3/4 of the way up the rod. And then it's multiple running guides out. They're very small. You can use micro guides, 6 millimeters, and you put a little more guides on the rod itself, but they're a lot smaller and they're lighter. And then as far as the moderates and the fast, it's just basic guide placement. What I do is when I custom build a rod for somebody, I try to feel what type of reel they're going to use, because that can change the guide placement pretty dramatically. So like inshore is a pretty popular thing for a 3000 series. That's like, everybody's using the 3000 level. So the reel height itself, when the stem comes off the foot, the spool position or the angle comes off at different reel sizes. So you want to match up that first gathering guide with the right angle, so you get the proper casting. And then again, as far as when you fight the fish, you have enough spacing and enough guides to evenly distribute the pressure throughout the rod blank.
That's awesome. So what's your what's your go-to if you could pick the ideal rod guide for saltwater inshore fishing? What is it? Is it a specific Fuji?
Yeah, okay. No doubt the Fuji titanium Torzite.
Okay.
They have a high price tag, but from what I've seen, the actual ring size is smaller too. So I don't know if you can see how different this one here is a Torzite and that one's a silicon carbide. So the ring size is smaller, it's lighter, and again, the ring material is very fracture resistant, so it's very hard.
So, and how many guides are you like on? Let's just say you have a 7-foot blank.
Right about 9 to 10.
Okay. Wow.
Plus tip.
Pretty cool, man. All right, let's talk about mistakes. What are the things that you wish someone had told you 8 years ago when you first started doing custom rods? A long list of mistakes.
This is gonna be a fun one. Start simple. Start simple and just get good at that. What I did, once I started getting into it and having a love for it, it was, I want to do this. I want to do surf. I want to do offshore. I want to do inshore. I want to do this. And I started just kind of Tasmanian deviling it all over the place. And it took me a little bit longer to get something down pretty good. Go slow. I mean, you don't have to rush into it. Just take it easy. Now, when you get pretty good at it, I'm at the point now where they can go out pretty quick. I rushed, didn't come out as well as I thought it would, and that's one thing. The other thing is epoxy, like rod finish. When you're finishing up the rod, the temperature is really crucial. I struggled with it for a little bit. It seems like it's probably the hardest thing that rod builders struggle with is the finish of the rod. You get bubbles, wave finishes, it doesn't cure correctly. Make sure you have a perfect mix. Regulated air temperature is really, really taken off on it, because if you're right around 70, 72 degrees, the epoxy cures very well. If you get these temperature fluctuations, it can kind of ridge on you or wave, and it's just another coat you have to do, or you have to patch up the coat. More detail to the temperature and the mixing of the epoxy is definitely one thing I wish I would have paid more attention to when I started.
Because I'm guessing a lot of guides, guys, not guides. A lot of guys and gals are probably doing it in the garage. Like if I was going to do one tomorrow, I'd do it in my garage, which has no AC. I'm here in Florida. It's super hot right now.
Yeah.
Sounds like that's probably like just asking for bubbles and some issues. I assume.
Yeah.
Okay.
That and the humidity too, that can change a little bit of things. So if you have a regulated temperature, something like a basement, or even, a garage would be okay as long as it's not fluctuating too much. I've had one, I dropped the rod finish on it, woke up the next morning, and it was just, looked like the Rocky Mountains. There was waves everywhere, and I had to cut them down and, lightly sand them and do another coat. And
what happened?
What's that?
Well, and what was the cause? Just the temp?
Yeah, it went from probably about 65 degrees down to like 40 something.
Whoa.
And it just started, maybe it was humidity too. It just kind of created these ridges. It stayed on the dryer, because when it dries, it's got to stay at a steady revolution, because the finish is self-leveling. So when you put it on, it stays rotating Usually after a good decent set, will be about 8 hours. So if you have a problem in between there, even if a rod dryer shuts off, then it just starts to sag and drip, but that's more mechanical failure than it is temperature. But yeah, that's definitely the biggest thing, is get into a place where the temperature doesn't change that much and it's clean. That's the other thing, is cleanliness. When you have a lot of dust, dirt, and debris moving around, you can get that locked up into the rod finish and make it, you'll be able to see it.
So in terms of other mistakes, as someone new, we're going to talk about, your rod, you're using the Century and you're using some really high end stuff. I mean, you're making and Tony, who I respect and is one of our coaches and his friend, said it was one of the nicest rods they've ever used. So you're using some high end stuff. I personally would be a little bit scared to start off with, really crazy. Is that good advice too, to kind of just get a more moderately priced blank and start off?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. It doesn't actually, to actually start off, I would get an old rod that's just laying around and do some repairs on it. You can get an inexpensive guide set, basic, kit to build, some thread, and just watch some videos and learn, and do the rod repair thing first, as opposed to starting off from scratch and putting money into it and realizing, this really isn't for me. That's the easiest way to do it. I'm sure there's, pretty much every angler has a rod sitting and they stare at it for 7 years and it just sits there collecting dust. Strip the guides off it, put a new set of, or even just strip it off and redo the guides, put new thread on it, lay some rod finish on it, and see how it comes out. That's the least expensive way to get started. And once okay, this is for me, then you step it up a little bit, and then you start your first rod build. Doesn't have to be crazy, and just very simplistic, clean. Try to get good at the cleanliness and the mechanical aspects of it, as far as spacing and all that stuff, and then you can really go into the wild stuff.
So at least as a beginner, what do you need in terms of what tools, machinery?
Okay. Basically, you don't need much. I've seen, basically you need a wrapper. So it's either a hand wrapper, you turn it by hand, or a power wrapper, something like this, which you just step on a foot pedal and it rotates. I've seen them homemade. It's basically just a piece of wood cut with a V-notch on either side. And you have some sort of thread carriage with a tensioner, so you can keep the thread, have some tension on it, and you can just start it like that. You could even make the wrappers homemade. They have inexpensive hand wrappers. As far as tool goes, you'll want a reamer, something like this to ream grips. And basically what that is, it's just a sandpaper cutting tool, or you can get them in metal too, but it's tapered to the way the rod blank is, so you can tightly fit grips. So like a burnishing tool or a thread packing tool, which is kind of just
that just pushes the thread down and tightens it.
You can kind of just roll it back and forth, and the thread will lay out more evenly. My favorite one is my thumbnails. Just make sure they're clean, so you're not junking everything up, but you can really pack in pretty tight there. Yeah, basically you can get started easily for under $100. Some simple thread.
Materials, and that doesn't include the blank, or does?
Yeah, it can. They sell rod kits that are very budgetable to get started. You can definitely do it for right around there. Yep.
Cool. Very cool, man. One more. I had a question here I forgot earlier. When knowing what what are and this is more on the mistake side, how do you know when a rod is cheap? There's some rods that I feel that are way overpriced, without calling out any specific brands. What's the first thing you look for? Is it the guides? Is it, what are you doing in a store to check out a rod to say, all right, this is legit. This is a great deal.
I would say, start with the guides. That'll tell you the frame, the way the guides sit. There's so many different manufacturers out there, and there's probably thousands of different options you can do to completely build a rod.
Yeah.
The blank feel, that's a huge one. I'm sure you picked up a rod, or anybody's picked up a rod, they just feel it and they're like, oh, this doesn't feel right. Maybe it's too limber, or you'll be able to feel the quality of a blank just by picking it up. Even comfort. Some of the rods I've seen put together, they're just thrown together, and it just doesn't feel comfortable. It didn't seem like there was a lot of thought process into doing it. So, I mean, nowadays I would say a lot of the rods are pretty well built, though. There's just different levels. Like with anything, you have your good, better, best, and ultimate type of thing. So it's just really where you go with that.
All right, let's move into that then. On the best, because I talked to you offline and you've kind of talked about your journey of doing this. And from what you can tell and the feedback I've heard, you're using Century blanks. Is that right?
Yes.
And why?
Basically, I've built on all different kinds of blanks. And when I built on my first Century, I decided to try to take it up a notch. And when I built on the first Century, I realized there's something here that is like nothing else I've ever felt. And it just excelled from there. Basically, I dedicated myself to the rod brand because of how good they really are. Like I said, they're sensitive, long casting, very strong, lightweight. They're very versatile, so you can do many of different applications to it. It was basically trial and error, and then I met a friend of mine, Ryan White, down in the Outer Banks, and he was the one who kind of put me on my first Century. And he said, "Here, try this one out." So I said, "All right, I'll give it a shot." And then when I threw it for the first time in the surf, I knew right then and there, I'm like, this is it. This is the one. And then ever since then,
you were just what is it? The feel you were able to launch it, everything.
Oh yeah, it was the feel. It loaded extremely well. So for loading is like when you're casting, you can feel the energy in the rod itself and the way it released. When I was throwing, 3 ounces of weight with it, it was a 11-foot rod rated 2 to 5 ounces, and the sweet spot was right about 3 ounces. And it felt so smooth. And then when I put my first decent big size red on it, you could just feel, it almost felt like you were fighting the fish with a hand line almost, like you could feel the energy in the butt section. And I knew right then and there, that's the way you want a rod to feel. And then it just progressed from there. And the technology is getting better and better and better. This was 5 years ago, I think, is when I first built the first Century, and then now it's all I want to build.
And it's tough to use other ones, huh?
It's really tough. It's really tough.
and so what other components? So you got the blank. What else do you like in terms of? We're gonna now talk high end, like in terms of the best. What are you using?
A lot of Alp seats. So you have different style seats. You have your full anodized aluminum seats. They add a little bit of weight, but they're very strong. And this one is an MVT Touray Alps Real seat. Again, you can put grips on it, or it could be gripless. I've been doing a lot of my personal rods gripless. And then you have like an Alps Rapid, which has a soft coating on it, and they all have the lock nuts on the backside of them, so that you ever get that real seat felt loose all of a sudden when you're fighting a fish. Yeah, you put that lock nut on the back of the hood there, so it doesn't roll back. But these seats they're very sensitive because the inserts and the carbon inserts, basically it's blank to finger contact almost. So a lot of the casting seats I used to are exposed blank seats, so your finger is actually touching the blank itself. That's what I've been doing a lot with right now is the Alp seats. I love them. They're amazing.
And then what else? What else do you need? We already talked about the Fuji guides.
Wind grips.
Okay.
Wind grips. Yeah. So wind grips, and I'm building a lot like the winding check, or the trim that finishes it off. I use all aluminum. I don't use any rubber. Over time, degrade a little bit. The aluminum doesn't add that much weight as compared to rubber. It makes it look real tight, and it just gives it that extra little pop. And then it just, I mean, aluminum doesn't degrade, so you know.
And you mentioned something earlier I thought was interesting. I didn't even think about it. Was you're matching, your rod to whatever reel your customer is primarily going to use with that. Obviously, you could switch it out.
Right.
Talk about that. What goes into that? And so, if I said I was using a Shimano CI 4 Stratic 3000, how do you change it up versus maybe something a little bit heavier, or is it by weight, or how do you? I'm trying to figure out how do you match those two up the right way.
Okay, that's seems like the most popular reel right now is the CI4 Stratic 3000. So I've been doing a lot of those. When you're seated up and the stem or the spool of the reel, I'm sorry, can be at different height with different rod manufacturers. So when you want to build optimally and for the best casting ability and everything else, you want to have the right angles coming off of that spool into your first gathering guide. So if you're off a little bit as far as the reel spool itself, higher or lower, the way that line pulls off the spool and hits the first gathering guide can change the angle. So when you build a rod for optimum performance, you really want to build it for, like for example, this, like I said, it's Stratic 3000. The spool height can be at a set degree, but if you put a 6000 on it, the spool sits a lot higher.
Yeah.
So the angle's a little more of a drop. Basically, when I build a rod, it'll be classed out for the most versatility, but still being pretty custom. So 3000 to 4000, stay right there. If I'll ask what reel you're using. That way, it just gives me an idea, so I know they're not trying to stuff a 6000 on something I would build for a 3000. So I try to get that angle correct.
So it sounds like height is the primary thing, but are you moving like the seat around on the blank based on weight and stuff too, to have like a balanced rod? These are all I'm just trying to think through questions I would have if I was trying to make one.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to what I said before, as far as comfort, some people like a smaller grip set, a longer grip set, depending, and that will change the balance of the rod itself. Depending on the reel, that can change it also. So now you're looking into if it's a little bit too tip heavy, you want to put a little bit of weight in the butt section, maybe change the butt out for something more like rubber, a little bit heavier. Adding weight to a rod, as far as fatigue and all that stuff, is really more not about the weight itself, but more about the balance. So if you have something that's very tip heavy and you're throwing that nonstop, it's kind of like you have your arm out and you're trying to hold something out there. It's a lot harder than it is up tight in your chest. So when you're balanced out, you can throw a rod that's a little bit heavier, but as long as it's balanced correctly, it feels like it's lighter. You don't have that tip heavy feel to it.
And so how do you do that? How do you figure that out, that perfect balance?
Trial and error, really. but basically, your stainless guides, you're gonna add a little bit of weight towards the tip, because they're not titanium. Titanium is very light. Where the reel seat is placed, I'll put the reel in the reel seat, and I'll be able to balance it basically after it's set up, and just after building on these rods for so long, you just know, right? Where it's supposed to be. But it can change. I mean, if I put a full grip on the back or something, it'll add a little bit of weight to the back, or basically the balance, you want that thing to be comfortable right at the front of the reel seat, or the front, just at the rear of the foregrip. So you basically just put your finger under it and you can feel the balance of it, and it'll sit level with a reel attached to it with some line on it.
Or at least it's supposed to.
It's supposed to, right. It's supposed to. But if it's a little off, you can add a little bit. You can have maybe a little bit of weight to the butt section of the rod, and it'll balance out almost like a lever.
And you mentioned something important. That's with line spooled on too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it's not going to add a ton of weight, but it'll add some weight. So yeah, it's beneficial to have line on it.
Cool.
And braid and mono is a little bit different, but I mean, there's not so much mono going on now, but
What do you got something against mono, huh?
hey,
Just
once
kidding.
you go braid, you never go back. that was me years ago. I'm mono. I love this mono stuff. Friends are like, "What are you doing? Put braid on there." I'm like, forget that stuff. And all of a sudden I throw braid. I'm like, mono? Who's that?
Yeah, kind of a game changer.
Yeah. Like right away. I was like, I just gained 40 yards in my cast. Awesome.
And all right. So what are the steps? In general, we're obviously not going to build a whole rod here. Where do you start? And where are the places that people make the most mistakes?
Well, first of all, get organized.
Yeah.
Have your stuff organized, because like I said, I'm not the most organized person sometimes, and I'm looking around for stuff and fumbling. And get organized. Get everything you have to build in front of you. Look it out. Do some research on it. And then I go to spine. I mark the blank from the spine. I put the guides accordingly, either the top or the bottom if it's spinning or casting. I'll basically go up, like from the start at the butt section, you can just go up. So you put the rod butt on, the reel seat. You get your spacing down before you glow it up completely. Make sure it's comfortable.
Yeah.
And just move up the rod, and then when you drop the guides on, get your spacing down. Do a static test to it. So basically, what you're doing is, before you lock anything down, the reel seat's okay to lock down if you're comfortable with it. But the guide placement itself, you put a reel on and run a line through it and load that action up, and you'll be able to see where the guide spacing should be. If you got to move a guide, if you have to add a guide.
Are you just taping it on at this point? Do you tape the guides to kind of test, or?
You can. Everybody pretty much starts off using masking tape basically, but zip ties and a little tiny dab of super glue can go a long way. The real small zip ties, they'll hold them on there just fine. And once you have everything set up, then you start wrapping your guides. And I would say that's probably the most frustrating when you first start, is getting the thread to lay the way you want it to, getting it to start. And then, that takes some practice. It takes a little bit of practice. And once you get it down, though, it's, you're good to go. But I would say that's probably the most aggravating. Yeah, I know. I got aggravated. My first rod, what are we doing?
And then any other things in terms of you mentioned, the glue, the epoxy, like what are the other big issues where you're just like looking back, like, man, like that was so frustrating.
The reel seats, clean the inside of the reel seats very, very well. Some denatured alcohol on like a paper towel or a rag and slide it through there, clean the insides out. Because what happens is, coming from the factory manufacturer, it can have some residue, and that will not let the epoxy set correctly. I actually had a reel seat come loose before. Luckily, it was only one, but it didn't bond correctly. The rod bond that I use is like a U40 rod bond, and I believe it was originally made for airplanes. Is when they first came out with it. But it can hold a lot of pressure with a very thin layer of epoxy. But if it's slick and the epoxy can't bond to the surface correctly, you're gonna have issues. It can let go. It won't hold completely. So that's actually the one thing, is clean, and clean again. Make sure everything's nice and clean, so everything adheres. You're working with chemicals and glues and that stuff. Anything that touches, if it's oily, even the oil from your hands can change that a little bit. So you want to make sure everything's clean.
Do you need to wear gloves though?
No, you don't have to wear gloves. I mean, before I start building, wash my hands good, and then just get some alcohol and just rub it down, clean everything up, make sure there's no oily residue or anything, and then it'll set fine.
Cool.
But I would say just pretty much cleanliness is a huge thing, and proper mixes on the epoxy, because they're all like 50-50. So you have a rod finish is 50-50 mix, the hardener and the resin, and same thing with the bonding and the glue. If you have too much hardener as opposed to the resin, it won't set properly. It'll never fully cure, and it'll stay soft or it won't bond. That's another thing, is just basically when you're using your epoxies or glues, making sure that everything is blended correctly and you have proper mixes, and it'll hold for a long time.
It's awesome, man. All right, so tell us about what you're doing now with Black Pelican. We already talked a little bit about Century. Talk about how to get in touch with you, prices. I think that's something people are always curious about. I mean, you're doing pretty high end stuff. This ain't cheap, but these are rods that are going to be like the ultimate performance rods.
Absolutely. You can get in touch with me. My website is blackpelicancustomrods.com, or BPC rods for short, and that'll redirect you to the site. I'm pretty active on Instagram. That's the easiest way probably to get a hold of me. Same thing, Black Pelican Custom Rods. There's a Facebook page. Basically, I'm taking, and I kind of designated what I'm trying to do to inshore and freshwater. Do a little surf here and there, but basically I wanted to pick a lane and just stay with that lane.
Yep.
That way I can be extremely well versed in what I was doing.
Yeah, smart. I mean, everyone these days wants an expert, right? If I'm going to go get a custom rod and spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on one, I want the guy who's like, all right, this is the dude, Brandon, who makes them for for redfish and snook and tarpon and flounder, et cetera. So
that's what I just didn't want to put too many too many things around and try to have too many lanes to go down and get all jumbled around. So this way, if I can dedicate myself to one specific thing, I can essentially be, really, really well versed in it. And like I said, be that expert towards that one specific thing. As far as pricing goes, it varies dramatically. But being on Century and doing a lot of titanium stuff in the salt, it can go anywhere from $389 per rod. I mean, some of the surf stuff can get up to over $1,000.
Wow.
It's when you're looking at pricing, you're getting what you're paying for. I mean, that's the one thing that I know. I personally put a lot of effort into it, just for the fact that if it was me spending that kind of money, it's going to be right,
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it is spending that kind of money because I'm doing it, but it's also really something else.
It's also the most important thing too. We grew up thinking that, you spend more money on the reel than the rod, right? It was all about having the coolest looking reel. And like, we were so proud of our reels, and you should be, but the rod is doing everything. The rod's making the cast. The rod is setting the hook. The only thing the reel is really doing is taking line in and out. And obviously you got some drag there, but I mean, the rod is the most critical thing. And that was a big eye-opening thing for us, and Luke was the one that kind of discovered it first, because he was doing tournament fishing. He's like, he saw what I was spending. I was, buying these nice those are some of the first inshore reels I had. They ain't cheap. And then I would go get some cheap rod. He's like, dude, you're doing it all wrong, man. He's like, I'd rather have a more expensive rod and a cheap reel all day long. And so I think a lot of people don't realize that, how critical that rod is. And that's the most important piece of it all. And so I would spend a lot more money, and I have now. I'm more focused on, hey, what's this rod going to do, and then I start thinking about the reel.
Right, exactly. That's exactly right. Because Ariel Rodriguez is
Ariel,
Tony's
yes,
friend.
Ariel.
Yes. Sorry, Ariel.
Hey, Ariel, if you stuck around to the end, you got a shout out, brother.
Yeah. He caught his personal best spec right after he got the rod. And I think it was 31.5 inches.
That's nice.
And when he hit it, he said with anything else, it could not have been done, because what happened was he saw the wake or the plume and it was going away from him. And with the Century, he was able to throw 20 to 30 yards further than his standard rod. And he was able to drop the bait in front of it going away. He wouldn't be able to reach it prior to that. So you could have, the most expensive reel on there, it wouldn't have done anything. So I completely agree with that. Personally, me, I'm not going to say any company names or nothing like that, but I don't go too crazy on the reels too much. They're there to retrieve and let line off. I mean, there's different different things as far as drag settings and stuff like that. You can now, if it's heavier offshore stuff, we're talking a completely different ball game. That's I'm not putting something when you have a 600-pound fish on the line. You know, that's crazy.
Ball game there, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
something
critical when you're fishing in 600 feet of water. Yes, different ball.
Right, exactly. But no, I completely agree with that. I personally, that's what I went with, especially in the surf. Is really what I was looking for was casting distance at first, because I mean the surf, a lot of the fish are right up close to you. They're most of the time they are, but there's that time when they're outside the backside of the bar, or you're in a kayak, or a boat or something, and you can see the school, but you can't hit them. They're too far away, and for you to run up on them, like spook them, really get them out of there, or if the fish are running behind the bar, people are, as far as tournament goes, they can't reach it. They're just hitting the bar at the top of the bar, but I can get over the back of the bar, and that's where they're at back in there. It depends on the conditions, but you want to have that that option to be able to do it. And as far as fish fighting, the smaller rod that I showed you, as far as the 37-inch cobia and that huge red that pretty much drug them around in a kayak for a little bit, that was on a small trout rod. So you have the opportunity. Not many rods would have held up to that, I don't think. And he said the same thing too. Mikey in North Carolina, I don't think anything else could have held that. So you have that opportunity to land something when you're not equipped or ready for it. Now, I wouldn't say go ahead and target that species with that rod all day, but you have the opportunity to land that.
That's awesome, man. So someone contacts you, I'm curious timeline and all that. So let's just say I want to get a custom rod built tomorrow. What's the timeline? Because you're in Pennsylvania, right? Is your office where you are?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm in Pennsylvania. It can vary depending on load. Right now I'm kind of tailing off a little bit. I'm actually going down to the Outer Banks to do some testing on some new models we came up with.
Cool.
Some of the new inshore models, and so I'm kind of out of it for probably about 2 weeks. But it can vary. It can anywhere from a week to 6 weeks depending on the load. Yeah, so I would say average probably about 2 to 3. 2 to 3, and we also have some production stuff coming out. They're going to be a production style rod, but with a custom builder at heart, basically. So they'll be either stock customs or factory customs. So it'll be built as far as what our customs will look like. It'll be kind of designed by me a little bit, and have some neat aspects to it. But it'll have that performance in mind build to it, as opposed to here's a rod.
Yeah, cool. And you guys ship anywhere in the U.S.?
Yeah. Yep. I'll ship. Shipping is anywhere from like 30 to 45, depending on where it's going.
Yeah.
Standard. Pretty much. Once it goes over 8 feet, which is typically try to stay away from, but one piece 8 feet, the shipping prices go way up.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, as far as their castability and everything like that, 7.5 is amazing for inshore. Even the 7-footers. For example, the 7-footer, the Weapon Junior that I built out, I threw it 3/4 of an ounce with 10-pound braid, threw it 82 yards. So it's got tremendous amount of distance. You can hit schools far away.
82 yards, huh?
Yeah, out of a 7-footer. That's like I was like, wow, that's pretty far.
Yeah, 82 feet is what most people are happy casting.
Yeah, I think it was like 260 something feet. I forget what it was. I did it in a parking lot, so I measured it out. And made sure it was. But I mean, that was some little bit of favorable wind in my back, maybe like 5 miles an hour, 10 miles an hour.
Either way,
it's pretty impressive. The 6.5-footer, the half ounce. I was throwing a half ounce jig, had about 62 yards. Yeah. And that's one of the new models that we came up with, and then we have some lighter stuff going on now too, where we're getting in that 7.5 foot range, getting down lighter to get them sweet spots, because the way they're built out is we're doing something like the Ace, which is the lightest one, which is right around a 1/16 to 5/8 of an ounce, but you got that sweet spot right around an 1/8 to 1/4, and that's your money jig heads right there. And then you have the next model up, which is right about a 1/10 to about 3/4 of an ounce, and then you got the half ounce sweet spot, and then it steps up from there 3/4 to the sweet spot, and then really 1 1/4 ounce. With the Weapon, and the Weapon is just, it's a rod. I'll tell you that much. It's impressive. a guy in Mexico accidentally tail hooked a 10-foot saltwater croc and brought it into the boat to get his lure out of its tail. And I mean, this is a rod that weighs, fully built out, probably weighs right about 6 ounces.
Dang.
And it was impressive. Now it's got a little bit of glass integrated into it, and they call it the weapon for a reason because there's so many things you can do with it. Throwing it down in Mexico for jacks, and just having a blast with it. It's one of those rods that's it's so versatile and so powerful, and it's pretty impressive.
It's awesome, man. Well, this has been good, dude. I've learned a lot. I'm sure the audience has as well. And everyone, please go follow him on Instagram, Black Pelican Custom Rods. Check him out on the site. And by the time this goes live, you might even be back from your 2-week vacation. And hopefully you have some orders coming in. And I'm very interested to talk to you myself. So I got a birthday coming up. So this could be a birthday gift. So
Right. Awesome. That was great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Cool. Well, Brandon, anything else? Any other sites or Facebook? Any other places you want us to go check you out?
CenturyRods.com is another one.
Place.
That's CenturyRods.com. Instagram, like I said, that's the best place to reach out to me. Give me a follow. Give me a like. I mean, even if it's not your thing, every little bit helps. Basically taking this as a part-time venture, hoping to really launch this thing into the next level. I build with anybody will tell you that it's picked one up. I build with a sense of quality. One of my favorite things is when that person gets their rod for the first time and they are just blown away. Not even by the performance yet, but just how well it's put together, because that's a big thing too. I mean, there's some builders out there to do some crazy custom wraps, and they're works of art. Like, I wouldn't even want to use the darn thing. I just want to put it on the wall and stare at it. But it's really one of my best feelings is when the first message I get from somebody who goes, "What the heck is this thing, and how do I get another one?" It's just kind of like they're blown away by it. So it's kind of keeps me going, and anybody that's listening that's picked one up, and you know what I mean.
Yep, including Ariel. Now, second shout out since we
Ariel's quick funny story. Ariel was out there. I think it was a Mosquito Lagoon down there, and he had a lure break off on the Century, and he said it was so hot. You feel like sitting there and retying. He just grabbed his other rod. He threw it 2 times. Said, "Screw this." Put it down and went home. He left and went home. He didn't want to tie it on another one on because I guess it was hot and was killing him out there. But I was like, "What? Really?" He's like, "I didn't even want to fish anything else." He just left. So that's pretty funny.
That's pretty funny. Well, cool, man. That says a lot about you and what you're building, and I really appreciate this time. Super helpful. Ariel and Tony were both right. Very knowledgeable, and I think everyone got a lot out of this. So if you guys have any questions, we'll put a whole blog about the podcast at saltstrong.com/podcast, and we'll put links to all Brandon's sites that he mentioned and ways to get in touch with you. So, dude, thank you again. This has been a really good one.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I had a blast.
Yeah, good times, brother.
All right. Play lines.